Chapter 15 First Prince Upilama's suit of the Hentai off. The further south I had traveled, the drier the land had become, with the scrub finally giving way to sand on the final leg of the journey south of Bilos. I had left Hazel weeks ago, and was looking forward to finally reaching Rasharan. Originally, I admit, I had been looking forward to visiting the legendary kingdom simply to visit such an ancient land. Now, I just wanted to stop traveling for a change. My prince, Shouty spoke from where he drove the chariot I was traveling on. You seem impatient again. How can I not be? I sighed, yet you will advise me to remain calm despite there not being anyone who can even see us yet. It is my job and class, your highness, advisor, Shouty replied, his eyes scanning the desert around them. And we can never be sure what skills might exist. They could have eyes on us already. Is that even an issue if they do? I shrug, not particularly concerned by the thought. Rasharan will soon be our allies, but even if they weren't despite its age, the Rasharan Empire's military is lacking. That makes it more of an issue, my prince. Our battles will no longer be with the spear and arrow, but with words and trade. Appearance is your armor in this, and we risk ambush because you are feeling petulant. Look, their fort is just ahead. Indeed it was, you could hardly miss the structure with how it shone. I straightened up, fixing my robe, which I was coming to hate in the sun, and did my best to look regal. Honestly, I felt that one of my younger brothers should have come down here. I could do far more for the Empire in battle against the monsters that rose from the chasms. Regardless, my father gave a command and refusal was not an option. Besides, we could use the soldiers from Bilos and other places. It still took time for us to arrive, even though we were traveling purely by chariot. Given the distance involved, doing anything else would take far too long. I expected that we would be spending the night at the fort, which would at least be an improvement on camping in the increasingly hostile terrain. A brief exchange of messengers and we were waved through the gate. It certainly looked impressive, to the untrained eye at least. I doubted laying siege to this fort would be very difficult, presuming we had access to water. Of course, that was Rasharan's largest advantage. When moving an army to fight them, a general had to expect to lose many soldiers to the heat and the sand. Rasharan could often afford to lose battle after battle, doing little besides delaying their enemies. They would win the war as the land did the fighting for them, so it shouldn't be a surprise that their forts looked like a stiff breeze would knock them over. Inside, however, soldiers were arranged in an honor guard to welcome them in the courtyard. Servants rushed forward to look after their horses and guide them to their hosts. Banners of linen flowed from some of the windows, and their hosts came forward to meet them. Mostly soldiers and the base commander, and my breath caught in my throat. The words I had planned to speak flew from my mind. She was tall, only barely shorter than I was, and her straight, long, and glossy black hair contrasted against her white dress that ended just above her ankles. Barefoot, but adorned with gold and jewels. Bracelets, anklets, armlets, necklaces, and even woven into her hair, she wore more wealth than even my father did, but it didn't look tasteless. No, against her olive skin her jewelry stood out and shone, sparkling in the bright sun. A perfect face, with bright red lips and wide brown eyes that a man could lose themselves in. I had to admit, when Shouty cleared his throat to bring me back the present, that I had. It wasn't illusion magic, it couldn't be that or mind magic. The priests had provided me amulets that were proof against that. No, she was just that beautiful, and she was now coming up to meet him. My greetings to you, Upilama's suit, first prince of the Hentai. Her voice had a musical quality as she spoke and she bowed to me. I welcome you to Rasharan. I am Hathiemrehemer, 17th Princess of Rasharan and your guide while visiting our empire. Please, allow our servant to guide you to where you can refresh yourself after your travels before we meet and sup. I was in a bit of a daze, but I am fairly certain I managed to stutter out a somewhat reasonable response before I was guided away. Immediately after I was away from her, I cursed myself for acting like a fool. Was I some child to be distracted by a woman? Yes. Yes, damn it, I was. Shawty? I asked when we were in private for the moment. Did she use a skill on me? She was calming the entire crowd, yourself included, Your Highness, Shawty replied. This is a grave insult. Sending such a low-rank member of the royal family to meet you and then her using her skills so openly? These emotions were what I was feeling when I was being calmed. Her decision was clearly the correct one. My heart might have stopped if she had encouraged my emotions. Shawty, I say, still somewhat breathless. You must be made of stone to not react to her, if I wasn't calmed. This Princess Hammer must have an incredibly high charisma. Shawty looked thoughtful. She certainly seemed beautiful to me, but your reaction reminds me of the reactions people have when their willpower is overwhelmed. I am a first prince and a general. I gasp, considering what it would mean for her charisma to be that high, but on the other hand, but for a reaction like this, she must actually like me herself and want me to like her. Shawty just groaned. Of course she does. If I recall correctly, this whole thing started as her idea. She wants to forge connections with you to aid her own power. Clear your head. You know damn well you have the willpower to resist this. Your willpower was overwhelmed partially because she is just plainly beautiful even without the charisma. You just let yourself become struck by her. I'm not even surprised that your tendency to womanize has already caused problems, Shawty muttered as he shook his head. You don't even see this as an insult, do you? Is it one? I challenge, although I know he is correct in some ways. I won't allow myself to be overwhelmed again. I was merely surprised to see pure water after so long traveling in a desert. Who would you rather be welcomed by, her or some random official or prince? Shawty just rolled his eyes as he helped me to clean up properly. I wouldn't allow anyone else to act like this around me, and even him only in private, but his counsel was always sound. I valued his thoughts far more than his attitude. I had given it up even trying to fix that. After we had rested some from our travels, a servant invited us to eat with the princess and commander. I was looking forward to something more than travel rations, although I didn't expect much from a barter for it. However, when we were led to the dining hall, I was surprised to see a table laid out that would put many smaller cities to shame. Greetings and welcome again, First Prince. The music of the princess's voice didn't cloud my mind this time. Nor did her graceful movements, so complimented by the bells, as she showed me to my seat. Your presence here fills me with joy as it shows that the effort I have put into the peace between our empires is not in vain. I am quite happy to be here. I gave her my best smile as a servant served my wine in a highly decorated glass cup. Now that I was more focused, I saw that her skills weren't beguiling in nature, rather they worked to inspire emotion. An important difference. But from your words am I to take the meaning that you are the architect of this peace treaty? I would not dare take full credit, she demurred. The negotiations are in the hands of my great father and your own, Your Highness. I merely pushed for them to happen in the beginning and take responsibility as your guide during your visit. Fascinating. I took a drink of the wine, which was quite good, to give myself time to think. That she was the person behind this peace proposal from Rasharan changed things. It certainly explained why she was here to greet us, and it also meant that there was a lot more to this woman than a pretty face. But your father, the pharaoh, is the only one who can negotiate with us, correct? Indeed, gods, even her movements while seated felt like they were part of some dance. No one would dare usurp his authority in Rasharan. His words are law for our entire empire. Hot bread was served, along with cuts of seasoned meat served with a mix of vegetables and fruit. All of it was fresh. Even the leafy greens had not yet wilted. They were served on ivory plates and came with ivory utensils. I hadn't seen utensils quite like these before, but their use was immediately obvious and convenient for cutting and eating the meat especially. I do apologize for the poor fare today. Princess Hammer bowed her head towards them. Unfortunately, it is hard to bring proper meals to the border. I hope you find it acceptable. I do, more than, in fact. It was wonderful to eat proper food finally after traveling. Will you illuminate our itinerary for the rest of our journey? She smiled, slightly showing her pure white teeth, and said, I would be glad to do so, High Prince. ****. The journey to the city of Algeria was far more pleasant than our past travels. Camps had been built in advance between the villages and they had been stocked and staffed as if they were miniature palaces. To my surprise, Princess Hammer was having fresh food run to us every meal by messengers with advanced classes. The villages themselves were decorated with banners in gold, with honor guards clearing the way ahead of us. At the second village, a salt mining village, the princess freed a group of our soldiers who had been taken as slaves in previous border conflicts, giving a small speech that she said she hoped would commemorate the end of such conflicts between our empires. She also presented them with a small fortune of gold as compensation for their enslavement. As we traveled, we conversed, and I found her to be rather learned. Surprisingly so, and to the point she even had the scholar class. She could speak with eloquence on many topics, although admittedly I think she could make the coarsest swearing seem eloquent if she wished, with an eye towards the future repercussions of actions. I had thought she was more than just a pretty face when I had learned that she was behind the peace treaty, but I had very clearly underestimated her. Perhaps I had underestimated Rasharan in general. She thought in terms of centuries and millennia, and Rasharan was such an ancient empire that I felt that kind of consideration made sense for them. It was something I felt that the Hentai lacked in comparison. My countrymen tended to think in the now. When I brought that topic up, however, she only laughed. In many ways, you aren't wrong, she said with a wide smile on her face, but consider it in reverse. Rasharan is so focused on stability and legacy that we fail to adapt to the present. Our age is worthy of pride, but it brings us to hubris. It is too easy to look at an empire like the Hentai and see you as a passing thing. Something that will be swallowed by the sands of time like all the others who have risen and fallen around us. Sharanan gives us abundant food, such that famine never touches our cities. The desert is nigh impenetrable to armies who would seek to conquer us if we put up even token resistance. All we do is build, and although much of our work is magnificent, it might be all that is truly left of us one day if we fail to adapt to the times around us. The ideal I have envisioned is that we work together. Rasharan will provide the Hentai the stability of food and population, while the Hentai provide us innovation and adaptation. We have few who can challenge us alone. Who would dare challenge us together? Vision, that is what she had. A vision of a future that I had never conceived of. It seemed naive, in many ways. Pharaohs and emperors were supreme, the very concept of an equal was anathema to them, yet this would require exactly that. On the other hand, the benefits were obvious. Wealth and security beyond what either empire could have dreamed. Algeria gave a taste of that wealth. The Sharanan, they insisted that it was not the Sharanan River but merely the Sharanan or even just Sharanan, split into its delta here, turning desert into a paradise. The city was huge and densely populated, perhaps even larger than Haza, with monuments scattered all around the city. At the city's palace, we were welcomed with open arms by a governor named Al-Malik. Shadi would later tell me that he had been approached in secret by the men, who hinted at possible bribes in return for certain additions to a possible future trade deal that might follow the peace treaty. That was only to be expected, and I had seen the knowing, if amused, glance towards Shadi and Al-Malik from Princess Hammer later. The feast that night was truly grand, especially since it was being thrown by a mere governor. The meat of fish monsters cooked in butter and herbs, red meat imported from the Mycans, even dishes that we would have found at home should we wished them. Wine flowed freely and there was honey by the jar to drizzle on bread. Fresh fruits, pre-cut and arranged into decorative symbols, were served on plates of silver and gold. Dancers and performers provided entertainment, and music was played throughout the meal. Though it only made me wish that I might see and hear Princess Hammer do the same. Something that I knew was unlikely to happen. Still, it was a sight to see, one that I might have expected to see in the capital itself. The excitement lasted into the night, and I found myself exhausted when I was shown to my rooms. This turned out to be a good thing, because the beds were incredibly uncomfortable. Who made a pillow out of carved wood? It was certainly decorated beautifully, but I would have been better served by bunching up my robes and using them instead. In the morning, I found Hammer giggling as I rubbed my neck. I think you can immediately tell just how much we could benefit from a trade agreement later down the line. She seemed amused by my pain, but I found I couldn't be mad at her. I've been trying to get people to try linen pillows for some time, but I've barely convinced even a few to use linen-covered wood. Do you not have animal products here? I asked. Leather, or fur. Wool stuffed pillows are very comfortable. They're also quite warm, she answered, and I could immediately understand why that would be an issue. It may surprise you, but many of the lower classes go without clothes at all during their work to try and avoid the heat. Surely the sun would burn them? Unless their vitality or endurance were very high, and they might have that with a labor-based class. Still, the sun here was incredibly harsh, so it might take higher stats than I thought. My vitality and endurance were rather high, a consequence of my general class which came from the soldier line, but I still had burns from our trip through the desert. In general, our people don't burn as quickly or as much, Princess Hammer answered. However, we do have creams that can be applied to the skin to help protect against the sun. She paused for a second, a look of realization on her face. Then she became worried, and began speaking quickly. I am a fool. Hammer bowed slightly to me. I hope you can forgive me for overlooking this. I will have the substance provided before we depart up the river. We will have pavilions set up so that there will be shade the whole time, but Sharon reflects the sun's light and it can still burn. The imperial princess immediately sent her attendants off to retrieve the substance, as I assured her that I took no offense. It was the first crack in her composed mask that I had seen. Of course, as a fellow royal, even if I was from a different empire, I knew that she would be putting on a face of some kind. This was merely part of our lives, part of the nature of power. In this, she was an amateur though. Her effort, her worry at the smallest issue. She needed us to succeed. Given the strength of her reaction, I was willing to bet her life depended on this. There really wasn't a way to tell her how to fix her mask though, I had already seen past it. Beyond that, explaining how to lie about who you are is a strange and foolish thing. It is far easier to play up parts of your personality than it is to try and fake a different one. I should know, considering I was playing up my flirtations and revelry on purpose to hide the violence of the soldier and warrior within me. I wonder how I should use this information, and whether I would even be happy with myself if I did. Chapter 16 Cadence Lee as Hammer Puff. The first prince of the hentai was not what I was expecting. He flirted with anyone who had a pretty face and was quite intelligent once he started to speak. I had been expecting a far more martial personality considering the constant conflicts that the hentai were in. Whether it was monsters or wandering tribes or other empires like Rasharan, the hentai were always in battle. Suit was quite refreshing to talk to actually. Perhaps because our rank was relatively close, but we didn't have the same kind of competition that existed between myself and my siblings. Plus, he was only a few years older than me, so his flirtations were more welcome than the advances of lecherous old priests and nobles who were often 3 times my age. After all, only old and powerful politicians that were secure in their positions could decide to take a woman as a wife from the royal family with the kind of baggage I had. These thoughts had suddenly become rather pertinent as I knelt before Father. You will continue acting as a guide for the hentai first prince while he is here, Father spoke, his skills causing me to tremble. I wasn't going to be given much of a choice in whatever he wanted, it seemed. However, you will also be acting as hostess for him during this time. I was surprised, shocked even. There were very specific implications from such an action, which was why I had avoided him despite technically being the prince's host. For Father to order me to do so. Great Father, I spoke hesitantly. Is your plan to have me married to First Prince Suit? I had considered your classes useless, Father mused, leaning back on his throne. For you to waste your talents in such a pathetic way. You should be among the top few of my children. You are intelligent, well-spoken, and your ideas have merit. Hammer, but you are the least of my progeny. I can't say I was remotely close to father. I didn't really like the man. However, I would have liked to be close to him, and for him to tell me that he saw me as worthless was unpleasant. It was not surprising, but it still hurt. And yet, father continued, I may have been too hasty. If your beauty can earn my empire a better deal, it is a trade worth a great deal. Part of me wanted to excuse him. The choices that a leader must make are not always kind choices. In every world I have lived on, marriages were often used to seal deals and negotiations. After all, what could be more binding than becoming a single family? In the games between empires, a beautiful daughter is a precious resource to be traded for peace. On the other hand, the truth was that my own father was ordering me, even going so far as to use his skills, to seduce a man I barely know so that he could save some gold. My time as a maiden being servile towards often rude nobles who thought of me as nothing but a commoner was less demeaning. At least I had a choice in what I did. Better still, this entire thing is your idea. You are the best option to go with them to maintain it, and what is a better show of commitment than giving my own flesh and blood? With you, they gain a connection to the blood of the gods themselves. I could see his logic. I could understand exactly why this was happening. I couldn't refuse, not here and now while under father's skills, and did I even want to do so? This was a perfect chance to escape the death trap closing around me here in the palace. I would cease to be a threat to my siblings and would instead become a valuable ally in another empire. As for the Hentai, well, I would have all the same enemies that the first prince would have, but I would also be the wife of the first prince. I would not need to worry about my head unless the entire Hentai empire was collapsing, although political games would undoubtedly continue. I was nervous about it though. If you counted my lives together, it had been over 30 years since I had last had a relationship, and that had merely been a boyfriend. Marriage, was that something I was ready for? In my first life, I had been encouraged to marry for love, and in my second life Kat had occasionally mentioned that she was envious that I, as a free commoner, could marry someone I loved instead of having it arranged for me. The choice between death and marriage was harder for me than it would be for others, I think. I knew what would happen after I died. Death was just a restart button to me. On the other hand, I still instinctively avoided death. I'd like to die peacefully of old age for once instead of being murdered. I didn't hate Soot. He was likable, a good conversationalist, and handsome as well. I suppose I could at least try. Maybe Soot would turn father's offer down anyway, and then the problem would be moot. I will do my best, great father, I said as I bowed my head lower. I thank you for this opportunity. I was dismissed, and I hurried to leave. I had arrangements to make, and plans to change. Asterisk. First Prince Opilimus Suit of the Hentai Poff. Negotiations with the pharaoh were difficult, but rewarding. He had wanted to delay certain things for tomorrow, however, which I found somewhat suspicious. The pharaoh clearly had a plan, something he had to show me that would change my stance on the tariffs on copper imports, or perhaps the export limit for textiles that I had proposed. Shadi agreed with me on this. He expected the banquet we were going to attend was going to show off something, to make an offer of some kind. I was skeptical of this. What could he show off that he couldn't just say? What would require him to showcase its value? Arriving at the hall, things were strange to start, with Princess Hammer herself showing me to my seat instead of an attendant or servant. I was almost shocked when she poured me my glass of wine herself. She had greeted me with the small talk one would expect during a banquet, but now Hammer met my eyes. I still felt I could lose myself in her eyes, but I had to keep my calm here. Instead, I merely raised an eyebrow to express my curiosity while keeping my faith in a neutral smile. Taking a taste of the wine, another delicious vintage. She seemed to search my face for a second, but I was confident in my practice. There was nothing to find there. In the end, she simply let out a sigh, and began to speak. This time, she did not quite meet my eyes. "Prince Suit, I am not good at this kind of thing," she said, looking off to the side. "Some of my sisters might be more practiced in this kind of interaction, but I am not. My first instinct when making deals and talking politics is to be open about everything. I think you can understand Father's offer, and I didn't object. I had noticed that about her, intrigue was clearly foreign to her. Instead of hiding her goals and working to create networks of allies to achieve them, she seemed to be the kind of person who tried to choose a goal that everyone would agree on and be happy with anyway. But you can't please everyone, and if I asked her, I am sure she would agree with me on that. The disconnect between how she acted and what she said. I have not known her for long, but I would guess that she doesn't want it to be true. Still, my instincts from my first prince and general classes make me wonder if I have simply fallen into a trap with that thought. It would not be the first time that someone has played games within games and laid plans within plans. On the other hand, it would serve as a guarantee of the treaty. In the future, when her brother was on the throne, probably anyway, her connections to his court would be invaluable. And of course, the offer was tempting just by her sheer beauty. It was that temptation that made me wonder where the knife was in the deal. I will just be honest, I suppose, her lips didn't move, yet I could hear her whispering in my ear. A useful skill to be sure. I tried to be non-threatening to my siblings, and I failed. I spent so long away from them that I just didn't think when I proposed this piece and didn't think that it would be any threat to them. Vision is perfect in hindsight, but now my only choices are marrying you or dying alone. So, please? I can't answer that now. I took a breath and said words that hurt coming out. If this really is a mask, I have fallen for it. I desperately want to accept her appeal, but I am a prince. For all that I love women, I would never throw my empire away for one. There are discussions to be had and negotiations to make, it is no simple thing. She seemed to deflate, her shoulders and face falling, before she pulled herself up and a smile returned to her face. At the very least, Your Highness, she spoke, the music returning to her voice. I hope you can enjoy my company during these negotiations. Later tonight I myself will be providing the entertainment with dance and song. It will be my first time in front of an audience, but I think you will enjoy it. Well, I can hardly say that I would be unhappy when seeing a beautiful woman, and if she dances like she moves then it is something to truly look forward to. The banquet continued with the princess herself serving me, and I could see the glances and the whispers around the table. It was amusing to have traveled so far and to be in such a different place, and to find that things haven't really changed at all. Regardless, she was excellent company. The banquet progressed smoothly until she slipped away towards the end. It wasn't long before I saw her again, seeming quite small on the stage meant for an entire troupe of performers. I wondered if she would even be heard over the banquet, and I thought it would be a shame to miss her singing. I needn't have worried. Her voice reached over the banquet with ease, just like when she whispered to me. It was as if she was right next to me singing clearly. When her dance started, she dominated the stage, twirling and leaping to the sound of bells and singing. It was absolutely mesmerizing, and soon all sound other than her song had been silenced and all movement other than her had stopped. The entire crowd had fallen under her spell along with me. I could feel her skills at work, she had let them off the leash. The minor emotional tricks she played somehow were woven into her voice, her dance, and her bells to become something more. Waves of emotions ebbed and flowed through the crowd, with different feelings waxing and waning as the performance continued. The song itself described the story of their chief god tricking their war goddess to end her rampage, and I swore that I felt every emotion the story told. Utter devotion, implacable rage, quivering fear, and unspeakable horror as the goddess did her duty and lost control of herself to her anger, destroying friend and foe alike. Impatient anxiety, brave determination, humorous trickery, and finally relief as the goddess was tricked, ending her rampage after drinking an entire lake of wine. I stood up, nearly knocking my seat over in my haste to applaud the performance. I had seen dancers, heard singers, and listened to storytellers recite epics, but I had never seen them combined in such a way before. Even if I had, I wondered if it would compare. The emotions she created, the exquisite mixing of feelings and sound was something I had difficulty imagining being replicated. Damn the pharaoh, that wily old snake. He had gotten my measure far faster than I had gotten his. He was probably laughing right now, knowing exactly what I would do. Asterisk. Cadence Lee as Hammer Puff. I continued to be the first prince's hostess, but that subject never came up again. I was too nervous to bring it up, although after time to think I had decided that I really would prefer it over death. Still, I think that my mind was still too wrapped up in my original life. I didn't treat myself as if I was Hattie Emra Hammer, 17th Princess of Rasharan. No, I acted as if I was Cadence Lee, in the shell of the princess. It had been 32 years since I first died back on Earth. 32 years. I am 51 years old, even if it isn't contiguous, and I act nothing like it. Part of it, I feel, has to do with the maturity of my bodies. I might be more mature than my age in some ways, but I had been more childish as a child and I certainly did act like a teenager as well. However, that was overlooking the main issue. I didn't change because I looked down on the people around me. They were beneath me. Why should I enter a feudal medieval society more than I must? Look at it. Until they break the bonds of serfdom, begin to centralize power, start the Industrial Revolution, and learn the concepts of human and worker rights, they are little more than barbarians compared to me. I might play the part of Anora the Battle Maid, but I would never sink so low as to be Anora the Battle Maid. As for Rasharan, they were in the Bronze Age, they didn't even have cast iron much less steel. The power was centralized, but it was also in a highly rigid caste system that denied liberty entirely. Even as a princess, at the peak of that caste system, father could order my obedience in anything and there was nothing I could do about it. I had no right to say, no. It goes without saying that such a society is almost humorous in how behind it is. I am not entirely sure that this is absolutely wrong. I am Cadence Lee, even when I am Princess Hammer, and this society is backwards and barbaric. But I don't have the power to change these societies from the outside. Maybe, someday far in the future and after many lives, I might have the power to act without needing to be part of the society I am changing. I could and would change how I acted from now on. I will work to convince the prince to accept the marriage and I will restart in the hentai court. I need to make allies, convince people of my views, and work to build a coalition of people who want me to succeed, whether because they truly believe in my purpose or out of greed and fear. The viewpoint I had was unique, what I could do was unique, and if I wanted my lives to be long and pleasant, I needed to make them that way. I couldn't know what world I would be born into next. For all I know, it could be worse than whatever world I leave, so it would be better for me to improve the world around me instead of running away. For now, that meant dancing and singing. Leaning in towards Prince Suit, and always giving him my fullest attention. I used makeup techniques, learned long ago on YouTube, that improved upon Rasharan's standard, even going so far as to risk poisoning myself by using cinnabar as a rouge for my cheeks. I did everything I could to show my interest, and it wasn't entirely feigned. The longer I spent with him, the more I was fairly certain that I would have accepted if he asked me out on a date on Earth or if he had attempted to court me in my second life. I had to accept that this wasn't Earth, and here things are different for now. I knew friends, back on Earth, who had arranged marriages even in the modern age. I had always thought the phrase, "I will learn to love him," was horrifying. And perhaps it was, but I could try. Chapter 17. I had a few more surprises in the following days. The first, and largest, was that Prince Suit was already married. I have to confess that it was a real blow to my determination to live as Princess Hammer. It seems even in my introspection I was naive. What, after all, was I expecting? Father had many wives, concubines, and mistresses. Even if I had been Suit's first wife, I was unlikely to be his only one. As it was, if we were married, I would be his second wife. I was instinctively put off by this, but after I thought about it I realized it was not as much of a big deal as I had initially felt. I wasn't marrying for love after all, so why would it matter if my husband didn't give me his full attention? If anything, this was ideal. the more wives there were, the more time I had to myself, right? I think that, but I don't really feel it. I wouldn't be happy with having to share a husband, even in this situation. I think I can tolerate it, so long as there aren't too many and I keep a certain emotional distance from suit. Emotionally, I would need to be able to like the man enough to share a bed with him but not be so in love that I became jealous of the others who did as well. I think that I would find this far more intolerable if this wasn't my third life and there were many more ahead of me supposedly. In that context, I'm not making such a big choice, am I? Except that if I did only have this life, the threat my siblings pose would essentially mean that I could either choose to be the prince's second wife or I could choose to drink poison and end it all. In the end, the treaty was finished and my marriage to first Prince Suit was announced. It was strange to hear news of my marriage from a crier before I had been told, and it worsened my nerves considerably. Rasharon didn't have a practice of marriage ceremonies, which I had always found odd, and as a result, as far as the law was concerned, I was now the second wife of Prince Suit. Just like that. I had a guide me to Prince Suit's quarters and found him on a balcony overlooking Sharon, with the wind lightly blowing his robes as he stood watching the bustling docks. I wasn't sure what to say now that I was here, and so simply approached him slowly while trying to work out how to greet him. He turned towards me, and I stopped when he met my eyes. "I suppose you have heard the news, Hemmer?" he asked, as he walked over to me. I still wasn't sure what to say, so I simply nodded and he continued, "I must confess, I find Rasharon to be strange in many ways. When we return to Hazel we will have to have a ceremony and a celebration of our marriage." He walked right up to me, reaching his hand out to brush my hair away and trace his fingers down my face to just under my chin so that he could tilt my face up so that I was looking in his eyes. Suit had a sharp face, somewhat softened by his short, curly beard. His hair was long, but above his shoulders, and fell behind his ears, held back by a golden circlet. His dark eyes seemed to search mine as we stood there. "I am aware that I am probably not your first choice," Suit spoke softly. "This is not a match of love, no, it is your fear, my own desire, and your father's desire for a stable deal. Yet, I hope that you are not unhappy with me." "I am not unhappy," I almost whispered in my reply. "I also want this treaty to work and I am not opposed to marrying you. As for love, who knows what the future might hold? From what I know of you, I believe I can come to love you as we become closer and I hope that you can come to love me as well." That got me a smile as Suit let his fingers trail down my neck and I shivered despite the heat. Then, suddenly, he pulled me towards him and kissed me. I was surprised, but as Suit held me my confused feelings melted away. There was more to a relationship than just love and marriage. There were feelings and intimacy before that point, and my confusion over the latter parts didn't need to distract me from the former ones. So I closed my eyes and leaned into the kiss, my arms going over his shoulders and his arms going around my back. He guided us back towards the bed and our lips only parted when my calves touched the bed frame so that he could pull my dress off and toss it to the floor. There Suit paused, allowing his eyes to take me in from head to toe and then back up to my own eyes with a look of hunger on his face. A second later he had swept me off my feet and was gently guiding me down onto the bed. "Shouldn't I take off my—" I try to gasp out as Suit starts to kiss his way down my neck. "My jewelry?" Ah. He had kissed his way past the nape of my neck and collarbone down to my breasts. When he reached the nipple of my left breast, my thoughts became even more scattered than before. Suit seemed to enjoy causing me to stutter and I could feel his wicked smile against my skin, flicking his tongue over my nipple to make me gasp. Moving from my left breast to my right breast, he paused for only half a second. That would take far too long. His voice came across as a low growl as he met my eyes from between my breasts. And I am not a patient enough man to wait that long. But I didn't manage to complete a thought before he began again on my right breast. Suit's left hand reached up to my other breast and his right hand trailed down my stomach, taking a moment to trace my belly button, before moving down between my legs. And he knew what he was doing. stimulating my clitoris before slowly inserting a finger inside me. He had me shuddering under him, panting and moaning. The tingling feelings of pleasure began to build within me as I clung to him. I felt his fingers moving inside me, the fingers on his other hand on my breast and the feeling of his lips on my other breast, and I started to breathe faster and faster, my heart pounding in my chest. Sue. The intensity of those feelings continued to build, my breaths coming out in short gasps, my muscles tightening. I think. Then the intensity peaked and the sudden release ran through me as every muscle in my body spasmed. Pleasure racked my body and I couldn't speak or move or think, and I could do nothing but hold on until the end. I collapsed back on the bed panting, a fuzzy feeling of a pleasure warming my body. While I was just laying there, limp, Suit stood up. Before I could figure out how to form thoughts and words, Suit began to pull off his robes. He was impressively muscled, more than he would be if he was just a first prince, and he had a scar that went from his left shoulder to his right hip as if some great beast had clawed him. As for what was lower down, all I can say is that it seemed big. It isn't like I had many points of comparison, but that is just what it seemed to me. I did try to sit up, to try and voice a protest of some kind, although I am not sure what I would protest, but my limbs were like jelly and his lips met mine before I could say anything. I suppose I could have stopped him if I really wanted to. Thinking was hard, but I could have ignored the ecstasy that had melted my limbs to liquid and cleared my thoughts if I had tried. I didn't try. Our skin touched as he was on top of me again and I reveled in the feeling. I ran my hands along his scar, feeling the difference in texture where his skin met the scar tissue itself. I was getting excited again, intoxicated and yet nervous. I could feel him against me and the heat of it ratcheted up my apprehension and anticipation. I am not sure I would call him gentle. Suit certainly wasn't rough or uncaring, on the contrary I was able to tell that he was trying his best not to hurt me and to make me feel good. However, that hunger was still in his eyes. A hunger that told me that he was going to take me and that my only choice was to enjoy it. Suit entered me slowly, and I bit my lip against the pain. It didn't hurt nearly as much as I thought it would, although it did hurt at first, but after that was just a feeling of fullness and warmth. He felt big and hot inside me, in a wonderful way. Almost too much, but not quite. Right on the edge of what I thought I could possibly handle when his full length was inside me. Before I could gather my thoughts, Suit withdrew and thrust back and causing me to gasp and my thoughts to scatter to the winds again. He paused again for a moment, looking me over and making certain he had not hurt me, before beginning again. I gasped and moaned with every thrust as I writhed under him. I felt the tingling pleasure build up again, waves of it increasing with every thrust. It wasn't long before I found release again, but all Suit did was pick up his tempo. I was too sensitive, and his every movement sent electric feelings through me. It was too much, and my thoughts went from scattered to blank as I lost myself to the sensations. For the third time, that feeling came again. I was so sensitive, the feeling came faster, almost overwhelmingly so, and Suit was also going harder and faster. Our breathing mixed as we moved against each other, my eyes half-lidded, clouded with lust. His eyes wide with hunger and victory. Finally and suddenly, Suit thrust deep inside me and pulled me close. I felt the pulsing and warmth within me, and that set me off again. I cried out and held on, feeling the waves of euphoria and fullness and warmth that dominated my mind. Finally, it ended and I collapsed back onto the bed in exhausted bliss. Suit rolled off of me to lay beside me on the bed and I cuddled up to him. Muscled it was, his upper arm was still somewhat softer than putting my head on wood, and I was far happier to do so. I slipped my arm across his chest as he lay on his back, resting against him in the afterglow. "How was it?" he asked softly, lightly using the arm I was lying on to gently stroke my hair. "Amazing," I responded with a happy sigh. "Almost indescribable, I have never felt anything remotely like it before. It isn't like I hadn't been touched or masturbated before, but both solo activity and the inexperienced and clumsy attempts of my first life failed to compare to this. Even the aftermath was incredible. I felt bliss and contentment that simply filled my entire body. I tilted my head up to look at his face, noting that he looked similarly content but also satisfied as he looked back at me. Satisfied wasn't quite the right word though, it was more like, "Don't you look proud?" I am amused by that, and can't help but trying to tease him a little. As amazing as that was, I will expect an even better performance next time. Is that a challenge? He is equally amused by my attempt, and his words contain that thrum of a low growl that sends a shiver of excitement down my spine, "Because you should be careful, lest I decide to take you up on it." His hand glided down from my hair along my spine to my buttocks, grabbing a cheek as he said those words with a grin on his face. Suit seemed to enjoy the little leap sound I made, but relaxed his grasp and went back to stroking my hair again. I admit, there was a part of me that wanted to take him up on that, but it was the middle of the day and he had already tired me out. My schedule wasn't exactly full right now, but I did have dinner to attend tonight. Instead, I reluctantly turned my thoughts elsewhere. Tracing his scars and feeling the muscle beneath them, I asked, "You must have another class giving you this boundless stamina, a soldier or a warrior type class? It must have been difficult to obtain considering how combat overlaps with being a first prince." "Both, actually," he replied lazily. "I am a general and a champion. The effort will be worth it when I ascend to the throne and consolidate my classes. My father and I have been working towards this goal for a long time now." "Oh, I can help with that," I thought, recalling my research from 4 years ago. When I was younger I did some work into understanding how classes and class consolidation worked. I was excited to explain, but in the end all I got was a chuckle. Suit went on to explain that what I had thought of as a breakthrough was well known by anyone who mattered. "Usually," he said, "this kind of knowledge is passed from parent to child in the upper classes. I suppose no one ever brought it up to you because by the time you would have been told, you had already figured it out. That is amazing, to have already understood the mysteries of the system so young. I was disappointed to learn that my knowledge wasn't as valuable as I thought it was. Father hadn't confiscated it because it was new knowledge, but rather because I had desired to share it freely with everyone. Personally, I doubted he would have ever explained to me if I hadn't figured it out for myself, but that is perhaps just my own cynicism talking. Well, regardless, I can't say I am entirely happy with that idea," I said, pouting slightly at his amusement at my own disappointment, but then continuing on seriously. "A consolidation with a champion class. That will put you on the front line of conflict. It puts you at risk." "True, but it also makes me much harder to kill," he replied. "You don't need to worry about me, Hem. I have endurance and vitality like you have charisma. Besides, the synergy between the skills of my classes give me the ability to turn the soldiers around me into warriors without peer. I might be leading the charge, but the weight of it is in the army behind me. I can't say I know anything about battlefield tactics, so I cannot really argue with him. In the future, that should be something I make sure to learn though because I imagine it will be useful for me in one life or another. Still, the idea of a general leading a charge just seems wrong to me." I let my thoughts wander for a while, just relaxing at Suit's side for a time. Eventually, I heaved a sigh, noting that the angle of the sunlight pouring into the room indicated that it was getting later in the day. We had to get up, despite how much I would rather not. "Don't worry my dear Hem," Suit said, noting my reluctance and watching my naked body with renewed hunger as I got up to find my dress. "We will have the entire night together as well, and many nights from here on out." Despite the heat, I shivered at his words. Perhaps this would be far better than I had thought. Class consolidation. Imperial Princess and Muse have consolidated into Siren Princess LVL-15. You have gained the skill in the eye of the beholder. Your skill-inspiring voice has upgraded into Siren's Song. Your skill Muse's Inspiration has upgraded into Siren's Inspiration. In the eye of the beholder, if someone finds you attractive they only are able to use 2/3 of their effective willpower against your skills. Siren's Song, your voice, especially when singing, Inspires emotions in your audience depending on what you desire to inspire. Allies listening to your voice will gain boost to their endurance and willpower, while enemies who hear your voice may experience hallucinations. This skill is heavily affected by your charisma and magic stats. Siren's inspiration: you can charge your art with emotion, and your art will share that emotion with the audience when experienced. Those who view your art are more likely to have a feeling of awe, and friendly viewers may become inspired by your work, boosting their acuity, dexterity, willpower, and endurance temporarily. Enemies who experience your work may be caught in an illusion or experience hallucinations for a short period of time. The stronger the emotion used to charge this, the greater the effect. This skill is heavily affected by your charisma, willpower, and magic stats. Chapter 18. The Peace of Flowers is often cited as one of the most single important treaties in the ancient world. While it is true that the treaty laid the groundwork for the formation of the Imperial Confederation nearly 1,000 years later, modern archaeologists and anthropologists have found evidence that the marriage of Princess Hometra to Prince Suf may have been the more significant event. Neither the treaty nor the marriage seem to have been treated with much importance at the time. Before the descent, dungeons had yet to form, and the eastern hinterlands were riddled with spawning pits. Resharan was more concerned with rebellions and conquest in their southern territories and had little interest in conquest past their northeastern border. This treaty was merely a formalization of the disinterest the empires held in fighting each other. However, many of the advances and philosophies that came out of the Hentai Empire have been traced back to Princess Hometra herself. New techniques have allowed us to more accurately date artifacts and have lent evidence that the first prototypes of the famous Hentai armor were pioneered by Hometra's personal guards. Those personal guards also were likely to be the origins of the Hentai elite soldier class, which allowed the Hentai Empire to dominate the eastern border of the Imperial Confederation. An excerpt from The History of the Imperial Confederation, an analysis of pre-descent politics in the Near East by Karen Smith. I seem to have gotten into the habit of sleeping late these days, and I can't imagine why. Sarcastic thoughts aside, having busy nights made it truly difficult to get up in the morning. For myself anyway, it was to my great displeasure that I learned I was suffering alone in that regard. Having high endurance, vitality, and willpower meant that Soot had a lot more energy than I did. He confessed that the lack of sleep would eventually catch up to him, but it wouldn't be for another day or two at least. There was also a skill involved in there somewhere, but knowing that my stats could influence how much sleep I needed made me rethink my stat distribution choices a bit. Not that I could change them while I was alive, although my latest class consolidation had effectively reduced my total levels, so it was possible for me to get another class relatively easily right now. Well, that was a thought for later. My current thoughts were wrapped up in yet more preparations. Before I even considered traveling, I had to come to some sort of terms with my siblings. Surprisingly, it was not nearly as hard as I had imagined it would be. My brothers and sisters were far more friendly than they had ever been, and on reflection it was obvious why. It is a sad fact that I think all of my siblings actually wanted to be a family together, but were too paranoid or scheming for anyone to ever feel safe in each other's company. We didn't hate each other, but everyone was always aware that they could be stabbed in the back at any time. I had tried, over the years, to separate myself from this, and now I had succeeded. I was safe to talk to now, because my path to potential power no longer rivaled their own. Indeed, I was now a valuable connection to the Hentai on top of not being a rival any longer, so it made sense to seek me out. As a result, I ended up meeting and speaking with almost all of my siblings before I left. Throughout these meetings, I expressed my desire to see our two empires work together and grow together. Insofar as I could or would lend support to my siblings here and Resharan during their various power plays, I would support those whose plans and ideas benefited that goal. Admittedly, I doubted my support was worth all that much right now, but I suppose they were investing in me on the basis that as a wife of an emperor in the future, I would at least have his ear. My eldest brother even came north finally to meet Soot, the two first princes sizing each other up as I introduced them. Presuming the political winds did not shift, these two would be the rulers of their empires in the future and the treaty would be in their hands. I suppose, in that sense, this was a historic meeting. The impressions made here and the discussions the two held might influence the world for centuries to come, perhaps even millennia. Of course, all of this was only on the political side of things. There were many other, more practical, preparations to make for the long and arduous journey. I wasn't just joining the hentai contingent alone. It wouldn't be proper for a princess to travel alone in a group of men, even if one of those men was her husband. No, I and Seer would be accompanying me to Haza. Undoubtedly they would continue to serve as informants, but the distance would limit their capacity to do so immensely. They would be my attendants first and foremost. 3 more people meant 3 more people's worth of food and water had to be brought along, and I didn't exactly travel light. Clothing was easy. I didn't wear anything but white linen after all, but my jewelry collection was extensive. Add my dowry and the various gifts that had been given to suit by my father and other nobles to that, and suddenly we were carting a mountain of treasure with us. As problems one could have, the problem of carting a mountain of gold home is one of the better ones, but it is still a problem. Fortunately, my decision to free the hentai slaves earlier turned out to be a useful one. Many of the slaves were charioteers, and after father, rather generously, gifted us a few additional chariots and horses, we were able to transport the entire party with gifts included. It was not going to be a very comfortable journey, but I had never expected it to be. Although that is a bit of a lie, my nights were probably going to be very comfortable, and I had a sneaking suspicion that I might be tired enough to sleep easily during the day. Maybe, anyway, because sleeping in a moving chariot is probably incredibly difficult. I remember how badly carriages had shaken in my last life, and I imagined that chariots would be even worse once they were off the desert sand. On the other hand, I would finally be free of the desert and sand. Don't get me wrong, the desert was beautiful and the gardens around the Sharon were breathtaking, but I would kill for a cool forest or a mountain or even just a grassy field to break up the everyday sights. It might be worth staying up even if I was exhausted just to see some variation in the environment. In addition to saying goodbye to my siblings, preparing transportation, and securing food, I also met with the rest of the hentai who had accompanied Sue to Sharon. Most of them were royal guards or royal charioteers, but the man named Shadi was an advisor, which was a class we didn't often see in Sharon. Usually, advisors had classes that overlapped with the advisor class, making it rather hard to obtain, and it was rarely the first class mentioned during an introduction. Shadi, however, broke that mold. He was an advisor first and foremost, but I was fairly certain he wasn't a pure advisor. It was hard for me to put my finger on why, but there was just something off about him. When I brought my feelings up with my new husband, he laughed and said he would explain when we were on the road. That made me all that much more curious, but I didn't have an option except to wait. Our route to Haza was planned out well. First, we would retrace our steps. We would travel up the Sharon by boat to Al-Azaria and then travel east to the border. From there we would travel northeast to the city of Bylos and then northeast again to Cadence. At Cadence we would once again travel by boat, taking the river north through the town of Katna and then further north before docking and taking a short trip west to the coast to visit Ugarit and the minor king who ruled the area under the auspices of the hentai empire. After visiting the king, we would return to our boats on the river and follow it up to its source before heading west to the coast and following it west to Taros. There we would get on yet another boat and travel north again to the city of Kanamini. From there it was a relatively short jaunt northwest to Esh and another short jaunt north to Kawa, where we would take another boat that would bring us, finally, to Haza. It was a journey that was both long and perilous, or rather, a long journey that would be perilous to anyone else. Traveling with a contingent of royal guards and royal charioteers led by a general and a champion meant that we should be safe from bandits or other criminals. Monsters were a different problem. The less intelligent or the more strong a monster is, the more likely they are to attack even a large group of humans. As we would be passing by more than a few of the chasms as we head north, especially between Taros and Konamini, there would likely be more than a few monsters to deal with. I was actually somewhat excited to see them. I had yet to see a monster that wasn't a piece of art or on a plate, and there was something that just screamed fantasy about them. From conversations about monsters that I have had, I know that I am likely to be disappointed by them though. Most lesser monsters are fairly mundane, and the truly fantastical monsters are not the kind of creatures that you can take the time to enjoy looking at. So what kind of monsters come out of the chasms? I asked Soot one night before we left. How does it even work? Are they breeding inside the chasms, or do they come from elsewhere? Our priests say that they crawl out of the underworld, he replied. Monsters lack souls, and so are invisible to Lels, the goddess who rules the souls of the dead. When a warrior dies, they serve Lels as a guardian of the border between life and death for 100 years. After that, they are granted an eternal reward. However, there are never enough warriors to guard the way up. I wasn't exactly sure what to make of that. On one hand, as someone who had died, I could say that I certainly had not experienced an afterlife or met any gods, unless Poti counts. On the other hand, the priests had to get their power from somewhere, right? I'm not sure what to say about that. The priests of Resharan give a very different account of the afterlife. Soot just shrugged in response to that, saying, our priests also say there are thousands of gods who often are worshipped and defended by a single people. Who are we to say that there are not many underworlds? Such a thing is beyond even the reach of an emperor and best left to the gods and priests. As for what kinds of monsters you might see at a chasm, there is not a limit. Some kinds may be more common, but on any one day anything could crawl out. You could find a pack of dire wolves or a massive griffin or a murder of flesh-eating crows, but you also could run into a weak little horned rabbit that runs away as soon as it sees you. Sometimes, the creatures are formless, manifesting as clouds or liquids, and a few being shapeshifters that can assume the shape of a man to lure you close by. That sounds terrifying, a vision of shapeshifting murder crows forming in my mind. Can't they be sealed off somehow? They are far too large for that, and the monsters would dig through any obstruction besides. Soot sighed as he leaned back, and there is no magic strong enough to hold them back. We certainly have tried. I don't know much about magic, to my sorrow. The priests and the pharaoh are the only ones who are allowed to learn and use magic. Maybe our priests might be able to help somehow. It is kind of a glaring hole in my education, but knowledge of magic and religion were heavily monopolized in Resharan. I could have become a priest if I had wanted to learn, but I wasn't able to learn if I didn't take the class. I was rather wary of that though, because what if the gods are real and they take an interest in me because of being an incarnator? I thought it was better not to risk it. Perhaps, Soot didn't sound like he believed that. Personally, I believe that the best solution is spears and forts, with charioteers patrolling between them. It is not perfect, but it works well enough. I am not sure what well enough is in the context of containing monsters. Maybe this is just my previous lives talking, but I would have thought that the only acceptable amount of monsters to have escaping to terrorize travelers was 0. Still, I hadn't even left Resharan yet. It was easy to judge people from afar, but if I understood the situation fully that might change. I didn't have much sentimental attachment to the palace, so when we left it to go to Alizaria, it wasn't a very emotional moment for me. No, my only friend, the scribe Jet, had died last year. Still, I did turn to take a look at the palace complex one last time. Even if it had never truly felt like home, I could never deny its beauty. Nor could I deny the beauty of Sharanan and the gardens and farms that lined its banks. The fertility of this land was due to the river, and it was not hard to see how people who lived in a desert would come to see it as sacred. The delta, where Alizaria was situated, was truly a vision of paradise. A natural garden that stretches for miles with flowers and fruits in abundance. I would be lying if I would not miss this place. My original plan to retire here was not really an imposition on me. In Alizaria, I ate dinner with Governor Al-Malik one last time before heading east into the desert. I took Suit's advice to savor the meal, because it would be the last decent meal until we reached Bilos. Considering it was a plate of sea-caught fish, I might not taste anything like it for a very long time because Haza was far inland. Al-Malik was giddy, of course. Everything had gone exactly as he wanted and Al-Azaria was poised to become the richest and most influential city in Rasharan. He showered Suit and myself with gifts, which we had difficulty finding room for but had to accept to avoid insulting the governor. If you had told me in my first life that one day I would be trying to refuse being given gold and gems because it was just too much to carry, I would have laughed and said that I wished that it were true. Somehow, we managed to find room for it all and finally left the city and went east. It didn't take as long to travel to the border because it was done entirely by chariot and we soon were approaching the border fort where this had all begun. There, we rested overnight, and the next morning I took my first step out of Rasharan and into the Hittite Empire. Chapter 19. It was around the campfire that we had made, stopping for the night south of Bilos, that I finally learned what Shadi's second class was. To my surprise, his second class was Courtmage. Why hide it though? I asked as I warmed myself by the fire during the cold night. I know that magic is monopolized by the priests in Rasharan, but I don't think they would harm the advisor of a prince. Suit and Shadi just chuckled, and explained that magic had a complex relationship with society. The priests of both empires claimed that magic was a gift from the gods, but the common man feared magic and many nobles were suspicious of it. Blasphemous magic was supposed to be an affront to the gods, and witchcraft was considered an evil worthy of death. I know that people often fear what they can't understand. I poked at the fire with a stick. But surely magic is no more strange than any skill, right? I can cause people who I feel are my enemies to hallucinate with only my voice, and I know there are skills with far more powerful effects. But we know where our skills come from, Shadi explained patiently. They are gifts from the system. Rewards for our effort and a representation of our lifestyle. The power of upmage might come from elsewhere. Rumors of blood sacrifice and curses are persistent, and they aren't entirely wrong. Blood mages and witches often commit heinous crimes to further their strength. You would think that people would want their government and protectors to have their own mages to defend against these criminals then, I reason, but that only earns another laugh. Because the masses are so well known for their logic and common sense, Suit said sarcastically. Frankly, I had to agree with the sentiment. I had lived in a world with the internet, and even with all the world's knowledge in their pockets, people still clung to conspiracies and lies. And if I wanted to learn magic myself? I asked hopefully, I mean, at the very least it would be something to do while traveling, right? Why would you want to? They looked at me oddly, and I admit that it was hard to explain why I would still want to learn magic after hearing how poorly it was viewed. I certainly couldn't say, because I am tired of waiting for my owl from Hogwarts, and I am not sure if they can even find me in another world. I suppose the real reason for why I wanted to learn magic was because it was magic. I didn't associate magic with negative things like curses and blood sacrifice. Instead I associated it with one world's pop culture and positive feelings like wonder and amazement. If someone had seriously offered to teach me magic, I would have jumped at the opportunity as I imagine any other person would have. Well, I am a scholar, I say instead. How can I miss an opportunity to learn? Who knows what is there to be discovered? Just off the top of my head I wonder, if a blood mage can turn life to power, can another mage turn power to life? Healing that does not rely on priests and the whims of the gods would be a boon when fighting with monsters for sure. My father wouldn't want me to let you learn, Suit mused. But I am not my father, and I don't believe in restricting my wives, and I have to confess that I like the idea of having more healers. Shadi? Your Highness, Shadi sighed, rubbing his forehead. I had hoped we would at least make it to Haza before making some kind of unreasonable demand. But that was obviously just a dream. As your advisor, I cannot recommend that Her Highness learn magic. Her classes already have an association with illusions and bewilderments. We already will never be free of rumors that she controls you. If she practices magic, those whispers will become all that much more dangerous. Then why not allow everyone to learn magic? I think aloud, create a school for teaching magic and put it under the supervision of the priests. If I am merely one person among many, then I can hardly be picked out as singularly bad. It would be unpopular in many places, Suit answered, but his face was thoughtful. Then he shook his head and continued, it would be unpopular among the nobles as well. Allowing commoners to have that much power is dangerous. It leads to rebellions and discontent. My experience in Rasharan is that rebellion, from the commoners, is mostly a matter of economics. I say this although I am thinking of my history lessons from long ago. If you give the people bread and circuses to keep them satisfied at home and an enemy to unite against abroad, then stability is quite very nearly assured. That is very easy to say, but it is not easy to achieve. Shadi quickly countered, and Rasharan provides a consistent and grand harvest that can be relied on. Outside Rasharan, the harvests are at the whims of the gods and they punish whom they wish. This only provides more reason for why magic should be studied. I think my argument here is sound, so I make it with confidence. If you can curse with magic, why not bless with magic? Bless isn't really the right word here, maybe bolster would be a better descriptor? Either way, who is to say magic couldn't be used to improve crop yields? It probably could, he admitted. But would it be worth it? I am less sure of that. I am sure of it, mostly anyway. These empires are basically in the Bronze Age, so it is likely that anything that they know how to do can be done better. For fuck's sake, I just left an empire where even an imperial princess had a pillow made out of wood. I know there is more to discover, things we could not even imagine now. The faster we start down that road, the quicker we shall arrive at the destination. Suit looked at me oddly when I said that, and Shadi looked at me sharply. I had forgotten that both of them had abilities that helped them know if someone was telling the truth. Suit's skill wasn't really all that strong, but Shadi's was far more powerful and nuanced. Saying, I know there is more to discover, would have come across as true, but the things we could not even imagine now, was a lie. I certainly was able to imagine the future. Perhaps I should rephrase, I quickly say before they can interrupt. There are things to discover that you would not be able to imagine, and I would never be able to explain to you. I had made it over a decade and a half living in the palace of Rasharan, surrounded by people with skills that can tell if someone says a false statement, and I hadn't tripped up. 10 minutes into a conversation where the possibility of magic is dangled in front of me, I slip up and make it obvious that I am hiding things. Shadi, we would only be risking a little extra discontent among the people and the nobility, yes? Suit asked, because if that is all, I have to confess that I am rather curious now to see what will happen. This time, it was Shadi's turn to sigh, and I gained my first magic teacher. Learning magic turned out to be a massive pain in the ass. If I remove the parts that I am fairly certain are just superstition, the steps in the process are fairly clear. The first step is to learn how to sense mana, the energy used in magic. This makes sense, because if you can't sense magic, learning to manipulate it is nearly impossible. The second step is, as I expected, learning to manipulate that mana, and I can only describe the feeling as trying to flex a muscle that doesn't exist. Shadi's method of teaching me how to sense mana was pretty straightforward. He just flooded the area around me with mana until I noticed it and then had me memorize the feeling. As we traveled the next day, he had me try to focus on that feeling and try to identify mana in the environment and in myself. It was frustrating, and I made little progress as we passed through Bylos to Cadence and got on a boat. It wasn't until we reached Katna that I was able to reliably sense mana around me at least 50% of the time I tried. Our next stop on our trip was Agarit, a place that intrigued me somewhat. It seemed odd to me that Agarit could be ruled by a king who was also subservient to the Hentai emperor. Yet, this is exactly the arrangement for many territories around the edges of the Hentai Empire. To reach Agarit, we had to stop at a small little dock on the river and head west from there. However, It was immediately apparent that something was wrong when we got close. We could see smoke off to the west, where our garite was supposed to be. The faces of our charioteers and royal guards tightened, and Soot began barking orders. Preparations to get our horses and chariots off the boat as soon as we docked were going around me. The only question was, "What do you want me to do, Sue?" I asked. In this life I hadn't chosen a combat-related class. Asking to be in the thick of things wouldn't necessarily make sense. But at the same time, I am not sure where the safest place for myself as a non-combatant would be. "There is a hill outside the city," he replied as he prepared his chariot. "I wouldn't be riding with him now. I will have a couple of the royal guards with you there while I take the rest into the city." "Will you be safe?" I asked nervously. I don't know much about war, but the idea that chariots wouldn't do well in a city seemed pretty obvious. "Of course I will," Soot replied. "I have the champion class and Shaddy will be accompanying me. To be honest, I am more worried about you. I don't want you to come closer to the fighting, but leaving you here alone." There wasn't anything else to say. The horses galloped out of the little town, churning up clouds of dust behind them. The desert had given way to scrub, but the ground was still covered in grit. But if I understood the distance correctly, would we even make it in time? That was answered immediately, when Soot growled out two words, "rapid reinforcement," and the world blurred around us. We were traveling as fast as we might have if we were in a car. I and Sir were screaming, but I was focused on the smoke ahead of us. As fast as we were moving, it seemed to take all too long for the coast to come into view and the city of Ugarit on it. The city was burning. The pillar of smoke we had been riding towards obviously implied as much, but it does nothing to illustrate the horror that I saw. Flames sprouted tens of feet into the air, covering entire sections of the city. Even at this distance I could hear screaming and see people fleeing the city. In the harbor there were many ships and a few pulled up on the shore outside the city proper. The raiders had come from the sea. I, Sir, a few guards and myself separated from Prince Soot, Shaddy, and the main force of our royal guards here. I felt helpless, standing on that hilltop and watching him ride to the city and entering the open gates. I hated that feeling, but there was nothing I could do. Or was there? I had never actually tested the limits of my skills. If they improved with my classes and levels, since I have consolidated and advanced my classes so much, might I be able to do something, even from here? I usually used loud and clear to whisper, but just how loud could I go? "I am going to try and use my skills," I warn Sir, and my guards, and then I begin to sing. First Prince Upilamus Suit of Hintypoff. I dismounted my chariot as soon as I passed the gates, sending my charioteers to attack the boats I had sighted on the coast outside the city earlier. My royal guards took up their spears and I drew my sword as we moved into the city. Shaddy didn't have a weapon, but then again, he didn't need one. It was absolute chaos. People were trying to flee and smoke was in the air, obscuring my vision. Any part of the city not made out of stone was on fire and I could hear the sounds of screams and fighting not far ahead. I took my guards towards the sounds of fighting running down the street and into what in better times would have been a market square. Now, it was the site of a desperate last stand. The city's garrison was outnumbered and at risk of being surrounded by their attackers who fought with wild abandon. Their armor and decorations were not like any tribe or civilization I was familiar with, but figuring out who they were could wait until they were corpses in the ground. Aura of the champion, weighty charge. I activated my skills as we ran into the fray. The first skill blanketed the square, filling our foes with fear and boosting the strength and courage of our allies so long as I was alive. The second skill gave our charge much more weight behind it, so that when our line hit the invaders we crashed them aside like a bull charging through grass. My sword clashed with one of them, but I outleveled my opponent and was simply able to shove him to the ground where I casually finished him off by putting the point of my sword through his chest. I dodged another attack from the side and unable to retaliate with my blade I chose to slug my attacker in the face, causing him to stumble. My sword took his arm and then his head. Around me, my royal guards were showing their strength, but the enemy had numbers on their side. Even if they lacked in quality, the quantity was a power of its own. They slowly pushed back my aura of the champion with a collection of skills from many individuals, and more of them continued to enter the square to join the fight. If it was not for Shadi blasting waves of fire that immolated 5 or 6 enemies at a time, we would have been overrun. Despite his seemingly unstoppable power, I knew that the reality was that Shadi was not able to keep up using his magic that much. We would have to pull back, but the garrison we had come to reinforce was disorganized, and probably would not be able to withdraw with us. If we found a better spot to defend, this city might not be lost, but if we stayed here or lost the soldiers of the garrison. An arrow struck me in the shoulder, and I pulled it out with a snarl, tossing it to the ground. My endurance and vitality were high, plus I had the skill. Heroes don't bleed, so the wound was very shallow and barely bled at all. More importantly, they were starting to bring their archers to bear on this fight. If we didn't retreat now we would die. I was about to give the order when I heard it. It wasn't something I had not heard before. No, Hammer was happy to sing for me during our travels, and even when she was just talking her voice had a wonderful musical quality. This time was different though, her voice filled the air. I could hear her song easily over the fire and the screams and the fighting. I felt like I had a bit more energy. Like I could think just a bit faster and wield my sword just a bit more flexibly. Hammer must be using her skills to raise the stats of every one of our soldiers in the city. And if she had fully and honestly explained her skills to me. Yes, now the sound of bells chimed in time with her song, and the invaders became confused. Some struck out at empty air or attacked their allies, and those ones that resisted whatever visions Hammer was showing them seemed hesitant. Their great numbers became nothing but a massive chaos, and rather than retreat, we were able to push forward. I struck them down as we moved forward, rallying the soldiers to me. Eventually, the invaders broke and ran. The exhausted defenders raised their weapons in a cheer, but now wasn't the time to celebrate. I organized the soldiers into squads to begin to sweep the city. There were undoubtedly pockets of both the garrison and the invaders fighting throughout the city. Every group we were able to aid would add to our numbers as we worked to push the invaders back into the sea. The fighting was fierce, and the heat was even worse than the desert sun of Rasharan. The air was full of smoke, stinging the eyes and choking the throat. Yet I drove my men forward, giving Shadi one order in particular. "Shadi," I shouted over the din. "Save your strength, don't use your fire unless you have to. When we get to the harbor, burn their boats out from under them. I won't let any of these bastards escape." Tobe continued, "Thanks for listening.